Jesus, the so-called Christ? What should I do with Jesus?
Crucify him!
Nail him to a tree!
What has he done wrong?
You're crucifying him. Barabbas. They're crucifying the man that took your place. I don't mean your place. I'm not saying you should be crucified.
Our cells are next to each other.
The crowd is picking up. We need to go.
There was a hole in the wall between the cells. I could pull a piece out and see him. I saw everything.
Barabbas. The Romans may have let you go, but they aren't going to let you live.
They beat him. They cursed him. They spit on him. He never said a thing. He never fought back.
Once we get out of town and find someone to treat your wound...
Did you see what they did to him? His back. That crown. Those thorns.
At least it wasn't you.
Why not? Why not me? Why him?
I don't know why not. But if we're going to leave, we need to leave now.
Stop! Stop talking! Just...
You're right. You're right. He took my place. He took my place. And this changes everything.
Have you ever been guilty of something that you did wrong? You know you did it wrong, but ended up not getting punished for it? I think in our heart of hearts we would all probably shake our heads, yes. Or maybe this is a scenario. You're tooling down the highway at 80, 85, passing cars, and you look up in your rearview mirror and you see blue lights flashing behind you. And you think, oh, great. I've been caught. And you start to immediately put your foot on the brake and start to slow down, and you pull over to the right side. And instead of them pulling behind you, they speed past you, and they get the car that's in front of you, and they pull them over. And you pass them, thinking, whew, I've been saved to speed another day. Huh? I tried to pick a scenario that probably most of us have experienced at one time or another. Now, speeding is a crime and is punishable with a fine, but it's not punishable by death. We don't put speeders to death. If we did, nobody would speed ever in the United States if we had the death penalty for speeding, okay? But we don't do that. Somebody else took your place in that scenario. But the same is not true if you're sitting on death row. If you're sitting on death row, there's nobody that's going to come and take your place. When I was on active duty, I had an opportunity, perhaps even consider it a privilege, to work at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, the Army's, or the Department of Defense maximum security prison at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And there were people in there who were on death row. They were DSI, was their designation, death sentence inmates. Those who were waiting their appeal process to come to its conclusion so that they could face their own execution. Nobody came to take their place. They deserved to die. They deserved the sentence that they had received. They knew it. In their heart of hearts, they knew it. And nobody was coming to take their place. Barabbas was imprisoned, and he was scheduled to die. Martin Luther has dubbed this scenario the Great Exchange. The innocent one, Jesus, became guilty so that the guilty might become innocent. N.T. Wright says, the story of Barabbas invites us to see Jesus' crucifixion in terms of a stark personal exchange. Barabbas deserves to die. Jesus dies instead, and Barabbas goes free. All four Gospels reference this great exchange, but all are silent on what happened to Barabbas afterwards. We can only surmise. But all are very clear about the kind of person that Barabbas was. In Matthew chapter 27 and verse 16, he's called a notorious prisoner. Mark and Luke state that he was a rebel who had been arrested for insurrection, and in the process of inciting riot, he had killed someone. He was a murderer. Acts also calls him a murderer. John, the Gospel of John, called him a robber, but the Greek word for robber is the word lestes, which is the same word translated as insurrectionist in Mark 15 and Luke 23. Now listen, theft and robbery are not capital offenses punishable by death. But insurrection was a capital offense. And Barabbas was someone who was seeking to overthrow the powers to be, Roman power in that area. He was seeking to create a riot to come against the Roman authorities with their heavy boot upon the necks of people in that area. Many people saw him not as a criminal, but as a hero of the small people, the little people. We've had people like that today in our own society that are fighting for a cause, but in the process they break the law and are arrested and perhaps even put to death. In the eyes of many, he was a notorious villain. But to others, he was a hero. And you have to know that probably every Jewish person in that city, in that time, probably had at least considered what they might do to help with an insurrection against Rome. I mean, these people were under severe oppression. Here's something interesting. According to the great early theologian, Christian theologian Origen, the simply as Barabbas, but they refer to Barabbas as Jesus Barabbas. There's the Greek. If you read Greek, or it's transliterated into English, Yeshua Barabbas. Jesus Barabbas. Interestingly, the word bar in the Greek is the word for son of. Listen to this. The word bar is the Greek word for son of, and the word Abba is father. Jesus, the son of the Father. That was Barabbas' name. That was Barabbas' name. Scholars have surmised that in later translations, the scribes omitted the name Jesus to reference Barabbas to avoid confusion, especially in this scene, in this scenario, and in deference to the Savior, Jesus Christ. But here's the thing. When those people, when Pilate stood before the people that day, and he says, "Whom shall I give you, Barabbas or Jesus?" What he was really saying, whom should I give you? Jesus Barabbas, Jesus, son of the Father, or Jesus the Christ? And listen, those people made the choice based upon their own circumstances. I want you to pay attention here because this is important, because you and I do this all the time. We look at the circumstances that are going on around us, and we know what's right and what's wrong, and yet oftentimes we choose the most expedient choice, the thing that's going to benefit us the most. We're more concerned about the pebble in our shoe than the character in our lives.
Say that.
And so when Pilate stood and said to these people, "Who do you want me to release to you?" they said, "Release Barabbas," because they saw they had a choice between two saviors. They had a choice between the Savior who would free them from the oppression of Rome, or the Savior who would free them from the sin and death. And they chose the expedient one to release the one that could maybe incite a riot enough to overthrow this Roman government.
Teach.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. Some people suggest that the two people that were crucified on either side of Jesus were part of this insurrection. Because that day they had prepared 3 crosses. The intent by the Roman government was to execute 3 people that day. 2 of the people that were intended to be crucified were indeed crucified, one on the left and one on the right. Again, they refer to one of those as a thief, but it's the same word thief that's used as, it's translated as insurrectionist in the earlier verse. It's the same word. So the person on Jesus' left and the person on Jesus' right were insurrectionists, people that were in the planning at least, and in the execution perhaps of an attempt to overthrow the Roman government. So Jesus was more than likely crucified on the cross originally constructed for Barabbas. And as this character Barabbas in the scene that we just witnessed in that video, he probably said something like that man said, "He took my place." And this changes everything. The reality is that Pilate could have released both of them. He could have released Barabbas and Jesus. And yet, only one of them got released. Why is that? It's because he succumbed to the desires of the crowd. look down our nose at Pilate, we have to first put ourselves in Pilate's shoes. How many times have we, given the opportunity to make the right decision, instead chose to go along with the crowd? Have you ever stayed quiet about something when you knew that you should speak up about it, but you kept your mouth shut? Have you ever gone to a party instead of staying home even though you knew it wasn't a good environment for you? You went anyway. Have you ever laughed at an off-color joke that was both crude and disgusting? Have you ever used the phrase, "But everyone was doing it," going along with the crowd? All of us, at one time or another, have gone along with the crowd. And that's exactly what Pilate did. Pilate's fears and insecurities led him to have Jesus beaten to within an inch of his life and then sent off to his death. And the great exchange was underway. Listen again to those haunting words from Barabbas. He took my place. And that changes everything. And so the march to the cross began. Here's my first point. It should have been Barabbas and you and me. It should have been Barabbas who hung on that cross. And it should have been you. And it should have been me. You see, the march to the cross was filled with anguish, but it wasn't Jesus' anguish. That it should not have been Jesus' pain and anguish. It should have been Barabbas' pain and anguish. And brothers and sisters, it should have been your pain and anguish, and it should have been my pain and anguish. Biblical scholar William Hendrickson said this: "It must, however, be borne in mind that the suffering of the man of sorrows was not only intense, but also vicarious." Remember the Isaiah 53:5 passage of prophecy from Isaiah about Jesus? It says this: "He was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his stripes, we are healed." Listen, this is, in fact, the climax and the focus of the entire Gospels. All sinners, all rebels, virtually every member of the human race, we're all invited to see ourselves in Barabbas. And as we do, we discover that the story that Jesus comes to take our place under condemnation for sins and wickedness, great and small, it's God's mercy reaching out where human mercy could not. Yes. Not only sharing, but in this case, substituting for the sinner's fate. Jesus took our place. Yes. Amen. There was another question that Pilate asked that day. After he said, "Whom do you want me to release to you?" and they cried Barabbas, and he said, "What would you do with Jesus, who is called the Christ?" They said, "Crucify him." Here's my second point. What will you do with Jesus, who is called the Christ? What will you do with Jesus, who is called the Christ? The question posed by Pilate is perhaps the most inescapable question that every human being has to face. What will you do with Jesus, who is called Christ? Will you continue to live under your terms without any change in your behavior, in your life? Or will you receive what took place that day at the great exchange? I've mentioned this before, but I have to read it again. This has become my most favorite verse of all times. It's 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 21. It says this: for our sake, God made Jesus to be sin who knew no sin, so that in Jesus we might become the righteousness of God. This is, brothers and sisters, the great exchange. Jesus took your place and my place. It should have been Barabbas on that cross at the center. It should have been you on that cross in the center. It should have been me on that cross in the center. But instead, Jesus took our place. He paid the penalty that you and I deserve to pay. Jesus took your place. And that changes everything. What will you do with Jesus, who is called